The story I have for you today is about an evil king. It is a far fetched and rather fanciful story, but you will find it interesting. At the end of the story, I have some questions for you to answer. Let's see how many of those questions you can get right. So, I will read the story to you. You have to listen to it very carefully and try and understand it as best as you can. And then try and answer the questions and get them all right. Okay? For all those who are new here, I'm Melaine from English Made Easy, and this channel has easy and interesting lessons so that you can improve your English in a fun way. Shall we begin? The story is called The Evil King, and it was written by Hans Christian Andersen. It's a very famous story. There once lived an evil and arrogant king whose ambition was to conquer all the countries of the world. He wanted to make every person fear his name, and so he attacked the world with sword and fire. His soldiers trampled the grain and set fire to the farms. The apple trees in the gardens were burnt. They stood black and leafless, and their fruits hung roasted on the branches. The soldiers were more evil than the spirits in hell. They watched as mothers wept, clung to their babies, and hid behind the broken soot smeared walls which were once their homes. But the king was pleased. Everything was going just as he wanted it to. Day by day, he became more powerful, and his name struck fear in all hearts. The loot from the conquered towns, the gold and the treasures made him the richest person in the world. He built beautiful palaces and arcades. Everyone who saw them said, "We have a great king." No one thought of the suffering he had caused them. No one heard the sighs and cries of lament that came from the towns he had destroyed. Every day the king looked at his golden treasures and at his palaces and said to himself, "What a great king I am!" But he thought he must have even more. "No other power must be equal to me," he declared. And so he attacked his neighbors and conquered them all. And he treated them in the most cruel way. Soon the king had his statues placed in all the squares of the cities and in the royal castles. He wanted them placed on altars in the churches as well. But at this point, the priests refused him, saying, "You are great, we know, but God is greater." "Then," said the evil king, "I must conquer God." And so he had an artificial ship built. The ship could lift itself into the air and fly. It was brightly colored like a peacock's tail and had 1,000 eyes. Every eye was actually the muzzle of a gun. If the king pressed a button, 1,000 bullets would fly and the emptied guns would reload themselves. 100 strong eagles were tied to the ship and flew with it. When the ship was ready, the king sat in it grandly and flew towards the sun. Soon he could see the earth from above, covered with forests and mountains. It looked like a plowed field, and as he flew higher, the earth became a flat map, and soon it was hidden by clouds and mist. The eagles flew higher and higher with the ship. Then God sent down one of his angels. The evil king fired 1,000 bullets at him. Like hailstones hitting the earth, The bullets sprang in all directions and hit the angel's shining wings. As he watched, just one drop of blood dripped from the white feathers of the angel's wings and fell on the evil king's ship. The drop was as heavy as 1,000 hundredweights of lead, and the ship plunged down so fast that the strong wings of the eagles were broken. The wind rushed past the king's head. The great clouds formed by the smoke from the burning cities he had destroyed turned into fearful shapes. One was like a gigantic crab reaching out its great pincers towards him, and another looked like a dragon. When at last the king's ship came to rest on the tops of some trees, he lay in the wreckage, and it seemed that he would die. But he didn't. I will conquer God, he screamed. I have sworn to do it, and I shall. For 7 years, he set all his workmen to build ships that could fly through the air. He ordered his blacksmith to make thunderbolts of the strongest steel, which he would use to destroy the fortress of God's heaven. Then, from all the countries he ruled, he gathered huge armies. When they stood in formation, shoulder to shoulder, they covered vast areas of land. The armies climbed into the marvelously constructed airships. The king himself was about to board the ship when God let loose a swarm of mosquitoes on him. They flew like a thick, dark cloud round the king and stung his face and hands. In a fury, he drew his sword and slashed the air, but not one of them was harmed. The king now ordered thick blankets to be brought and wrapped around him so that no mosquito could touch his skin. The people did as he commanded, but no one saw that a little mosquito had hidden itself in the innermost blanket. It crept into the king's ear and pierced his skin. The sting burned like fire, and soon its poison flowed through his body and entered his brain. In a wild rage, the king threw off the blankets and tore his clothes. He began to dance in pain before his soldiers while they laughed and pointed cruelly at the mad king who had set out to conquer God and was beaten by a tiny mosquito. Are you ready for the questions? Here are the questions. Would it be right to say that the king was conceited? Which word in the passage means a covered passage with arches on one or both sides? Why did the king want to conquer God? Find a word in the passage which means the opposite of real. What was brightly colored and had 1,000 eyes? Why did the king order for some thick blankets? Why did the soldiers laugh? I'm going to guide you through the answers so that you would find it a little easier to be able to find the answer and also answer it in the right way. So let's go through the first question again. Would it be right to say that the king was conceited? Let's go to the beginning. There. There once lived an evil and arrogant king. The first line. It says that he was an evil and arrogant king. So, would he be conceited? What would your answer be? Well, this is the right answer. The first answer is there. The king was conceited and thought only about himself. What's the second one? Which word in the passage means a covered passage with arches on one or both sides? I'll take you back so that you can find it easily. Did you find it? It is somewhere in this area, in the middle of this page. So the word is arcades. Now, how will you answer the question? Let's go back to the question. Which word in the passage means a covered passage with arches on one or both sides? Look at the second answer. That's how you would answer it. An arcade is a covered passage with arches on one or both sides. Of course, there are other ways to answer the same questions, and those ways can be absolutely correct too. This is just my way of answering the question. Let's do the third question. Why did the king want to conquer God? Do you know the answer without having to go back to the passage? I think you should if you have understood the passage as I read it. But let's go back anyway. Why did the king want to conquer God? Here, somewhere here. So I'll read this part again. Soon the king had his statues placed in all the squares of the cities and in the royal castles. He wanted them placed on altars in the churches as well. But at this point, the priests refused him, saying, "You are great, we know, but God is greater." So, now how will you answer the question? Let's go back to the question. Why did the king want to conquer God? How will you answer it? Here's the third answer. The king wanted the priests to place statues of him on the altars of the churches. However, the priests refused to do that, saying that God was greater than the king. Hence, the king decided to conquer God. Now, let's do the fourth one. Find a word in the passage which means the opposite of real. Real. What is the opposite of the word real? I'll help you. It's somewhere in the first paragraph of this page. And so he had an artificial ship built. The ship could lift itself into the air and fly. Did you find the word? And the word is right there. Artificial. Now that you know the word is artificial, how will you answer the question? Let's go to the question. Find a word in the passage which means the opposite of real. And here's how you answer it. The opposite of real is artificial. Let's do the fifth question. What was brightly colored and had 1,000 eyes? Let's go back, but I think you should know the answer without me having to go back. And so he had an artificial ship built. The ship could lift itself into the air and fly. It was brightly colored like a peacock's tail and had 1,000 eyes. So, what was brightly colored and had 1,000 eyes? The artificial ship. Now, how will you answer it? Back to the question first. What was brightly colored and had 1,000 eyes? The king's ship was brightly colored and had 1,000 eyes. Back to question 6. Why did the king order for some thick blankets? Do you remember why the king needed thick blankets? The king now ordered thick blankets to be brought and wrapped around him so that no mosquito could touch his skin. But you can't write the answer exactly like this. You have to write it in your own words. So how would you answer it? Why did the king order for some thick blankets? Here's the answer. The king ordered for some thick blankets to keep the mosquitoes away. Let's do the last question. Why did the king's soldiers laugh? It's right at the end. He began to dance in pain before his soldiers while they laughed and pointed cruelly at the mad king who had set out to conquer God and was beaten by a tiny mosquito. So, how will you answer it? Why did the king's soldiers laugh? The king's soldiers laughed because the king had set out to conquer God but had finally been defeated by a tiny mosquito. Interesting story, isn't it? I hope you enjoyed the story and I hope you were able to get most of the questions right, if not all of them. And I hope it has been a good practice of English for you, a good English lesson that taught you pronunciation, intonation, spelling, comprehension, and everything else that goes into learning English from a story. And until we meet again, bye.